Global Conservation Corps presents the Rhino Man podcast. I'm John Jerko, your host, and one of the directors of Rhino Man the movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote the coming release of our documentary film. In this episode, I'm talking with James Mwenda. James grew up in the foothills of Mount Kenya, where he was surrounded by wildlife and inspired by the local rangers. At Ol Pejeta Conservancy, he worked his way up from general laborer to rhino patrolman to caretaker of the last of the Northern White Rhinos. James is a Kenyan wildlife speaker and African wildlife educator, and he recently started Jemu Mwenda Expeditions, where he offers safari travel with intent. In this conversation, we dig into James's early memories of human-wildlife conflict and how that influenced his decision to become a ranger. We talk about his years out in the bush working at Ol Pejeta. We go into his time as one of the caretakers of Sudan, the last male Northern White Rhino, his work as an ambassador for conservation, and his new venture, Jemu Mwenda Expeditions. We even talk about his recent visit to the mountain gorillas. So much energy in this one, so without further ado, here's my conversation with James. All right, James, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you on here. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I think the first time I learned about you or met you, maybe briefly, was in 2019 at the premiere of Kafaru, the film that kind of chronicled the final days of Sudan, the Northern White Rhino that passed away, and your work as a caretaker. So I'd love to get into that story later, but yeah, it's really great to have you on here, and I'd love to maybe have you start out with just what you're up to right now, kind of, who are you, what are you doing? It sounds like you got a lot going on.
Yeah, my name is James Mwenda. Presently, I say I'm working on the travel industry, running an expeditions company in Kenya and East Africa as well. Also in the process of writing a book about my story with the rhinos and so forth, and then conservation inspiring book. Busy being a family man and all that comes with it. So that's where I am at this particular moment.
Yeah, it's really great. I mean, you've got so many amazing things going on, and we'll dive into more of them towards the end of the podcast. But let's kind of dive into your history a little bit. How did you get connected with conservation? Do you have any early experiences where you remember being in nature, or what brought you to wanting to do something in this space?
I grew up in a small village called Meru in eastern parts of Kenya, which is neighbored by the famous Mount Kenya National Park. I think for those who know, Mount Kenya is the second tallest mountain in Africa. So we were just below the foothills of Mount Kenya, and that's where I grew as a young boy. And growing up, we had one very serious problem, which was human-wildlife conflicts. Elephants would come from the Mount Kenya National Park, and they would come into the village where we used to live, and they would come and eat away everything that they could find in the farm. And when I was a little boy, I saw the chaos that elephants were causing. I saw the mayhem and the havoc they were causing to the villagers, and the pain the villagers were feeling. And this pain was directly felt to me when my mom got a land very adjacent to the park, where help raisers, because she was more kind of the breadwinner for our family, so to say, she borrowed a friend land just very close to the park. And we worked so hard to till the land because it had never been tilled for almost like 5 years, cutting down the shrubs, digging, planting, drainage, everything. And when the crops had grown, I remember we had planted some maize and some bananas and some sweet potatoes. We woke up one day and the elephants had entirely eaten everything that was in the farm. And we had only like 1 month before we could harvest the maize and everything that was farmed, because it was more like a mixed farming environment. So that was my first direct, desire, because at this time I was around 7-8 years, and I saw my mom breaking down and crying. She couldn't really understand where she would get food to feed the 3 boys we were, and where she would get a surplus food to sell and kind of get some money to take us to school. So seeing her breaking down and seeing the pain that the community has, because it was not only our farm, it was the entire farms that were surrounding. It was a herd of more than 30 elephants that had come. There was so much pain. So as a little boy, I started asking myself, why? Because elephants seemed to be these giant beasts, animals that live during the day in the forest, and during the night can take away and destroy our farms. Moving forward now, I would see even sometimes elephants would come now during the night, because we would have to camp by the night waiting for the elephants to stop them from coming to our farms. And that's my early interaction with wildlife. And that's where my desire to be in conservation was born. And I remember telling mom that one day I want to go and understand, because I was inspired by the Kenya Wildlife Service rangers who would come and push away the elephants back into the forest. And, I really enjoyed how they were doing it. And I say, like, one day I want to be a ranger, and maybe I will come and reside around my village to help the village from elephants coming and attacking. And that was my little boy's dream, to be in conservation. But fast forward, I wanted to study conservation more, academic level, which I wasn't so fortunate to. But somehow, some way, I had to push for my dream, because education was hard to get for so many reasons. And that's how I found myself in this conservation space. And after working through the difficulties I had trying to get to school and high school, I finally landed my role in Ol Pejeta Conservancy, where I started as a T-boy and then as a ranger for close to 2.5 years. And then later as a caretaker of the last Northern White Rhinos, where I served before I left last year. So that's in a short story is kind of what inspired me to be in this conservation space, and the desire now to go back and help with the elephant complex that was affecting our community.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting because a lot of people that I've talked to that became rangers, they have that some kind of moment early on that connected them. And a lot of people have those moments where, they see, a rhino for the first time, or a leopard, or something that sounds a little more, I don't know, fairy tale kind of experience. But yours was almost kind of the opposite, where it's like these elephants were coming in, destroyed all your guys' crops, and it was a pretty heartbreaking moment. But then somehow you recognize what the rangers were doing. And I'm curious, was there anything specific about how the rangers interacted with the community as well? I mean, did they explain what was going on, or why they should still protect the elephants even though they just came and ate all of your crops? What was that like? Because something about that really must have connected with you, that you decided later on you wanted to help out and become a ranger.
I mean, to me, it was the scale. We would spend the entire night camping out in the cold. We would use all the means possible to scare away the elephants back into the forest, including banging metallic stuff to produce the sound, including burning materials to have the smoke and the fire to chase them back again in the forest, including going as far as digging trenches to trap them and even kill them. I mean, at this point, they were coming between our lives and our education, our food. So seeing all these kills we had to go as a community, and seeing the rangers come in their truck with their uniform and just a gun and blanking it up in the hair to scare away the elephants, and the elephants would run back in the forest, was like, why this seems easier than just all the villagers spending the night. I would only be needed to be alone in my area to scare away the elephants back to the forest if I was a ranger. But then it was kind of what inspired me and seeing now the rangers, how they were doing it, how easy it was for them. And I remember all the men who were being asked to stay awake at night to stop the elephants from coming, yet elephants would not even respond to our ways. So that is kind of what triggered me. Like, one day, probably I want to be a ranger, wear the uniform, and come and stay in the village.
Yeah, so it's kind of this sense of professionalism and how they knew what to do, and it's, kind of defied all of the things that you were trying to do. It's like, how are these guys so good?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what the whole essence of it. And that's when I decided the uniforms, and I was like, one day, I don't know how, but I want to either work as a ranger or maybe more on higher rank in terms of if I was able to go and get some education, work in conservation in a more understandable way, so that I could even get the science, the education, and come and relate not only to carrying away the elephants back into the forest, but also to the villagers because I don't know. My mom told me I've always been very curious, but as a 7, 8 year old, I would still have compassion for the elephants because I would ask mom, why would they do this to us? And I was like, they are just animals, And mom would just tell me, simply, these are just animals. They don't know what they're doing. And it was like, if then they don't know, why should we have the bitterness? Why should we try to kill them? Why should we try to harm them? And in my little curiosity, that was now like maybe in asking my teachers and going to school and like if you study, you can understand these animals and how the relationships they have, and you can really come and help in terms of bridging that gap between the people and the elephants. And that's kind of my little young boy's dreams that I've been trying to pursue all across my entire life to where I am today.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that transition to becoming a ranger, what that was like for you? What's it like to become a ranger in Kenya or in, Ol Pejeta? What was that experience like for you?
My journey to becoming a ranger actually was just achieved when I finished my high school. It was a long struggle because I had like a 8 year hiatus. Like I stayed for 8 years at home without attending high school. And when the government came with a free education, I decided to go back to high school to try my luck. And I went back, and after that, I went back to the person that I was working for 8 years as a gardener. That told him, now I think I have a high school paper. At least I can go back to taking care of your cows and goats and land. At least I can get a job. And I knew he used to work in Ol Pejeta. And when I told him, please, even if you give me in a job there, I'm willing to work. And that's how I ended up in Ol Pejeta. I started as a tea boy, where I worked for almost like 6 months and, giving bosses tea and making sure the environment was clean. And one day I saw the post of being a ranger announced. Deep within me, I knew I just needed to get inside. And from the inside, I would work my way up to becoming a ranger, which was my dream. And I saw the memo saying that they needed rangers, and I applied to become a ranger. I went, I was shortlisted, but the senior management had an issue with my qualifications because I had done exemplarily well in my academics, and they felt like you need to go to the university. You have good grades that you can push, and that really almost killed me because I couldn't afford to go to a university. I didn't have the finances or the way to do it, and I begged them to give me the role of a ranger, and they accepted, and that's how I ended up becoming a ranger. And it's one of the jobs that I have done that is one of the riskiest job that I've ever done in my life, because the unit that I was working for as a ranger is a unit that is not harmed. So you are trained to survive in the bush using your senses alone. And my job was to be a rhino patrolman, which meant I had to wake up every single day of my ranger time to go brave the bush and look for where rhinos were. Because in Ol Pejeta Conservancy, where I worked, rhinos were like the umbrella species. It is the largest black rhino sanctuary in East Africa. And so putting so much focus on protecting rhinos, gives the overall protection of the entire ecosystem. So other species of animals benefit by that. And while we were walking, doing patrols and tracking, we would see other components of the conservancy that was going wrong and would report for help. We would see injured giraffes and other animals and lions and so forth. So it was a very risky job because rhinos are one of the most, especially the black rhinos, one of the most aggressive animals, and you're waking up every morning to go and find them.
Do you have many trees around there that you can run up?
Yeah, that was the only remedy. If I start telling you how many times I've almost been run over by rhinos, it's countless times. How many times I found myself in the middle of lions, how many times the elephants almost killed me. So if you're not running away from a rhino, then you're running away from an elephant. If it's not an elephant, it's a buffalo. If it's not a buffalo, you're in the middle of lions. If it's not lions, then just anything, because the bush was just a natural environment. So it's a job that requires a lot of focus. It's a job that requires a lot of mental strength. And also in our Kenyan society, it's a job that doesn't hand you a lot of respect in the society, simply because the rangers and the police in Kenya I put in one category. So it's the lowest job in the categories. So most of the times when I go to do school talks and I ask students who would want to be a ranger like me, I would not even get a hand raised because people are in the fantasy of becoming doctors and engineers and pilots and these fancy careers that have been made to look better. And so it was a job that requires not only that mental strength, but also from the societal perspective, those that are bad guys want to come and kill rhinos will see you as an enemy. So you have to be careful even when you're out there. But at the same time, it's a job that takes a lot from you, in terms of bravery, in terms of strength, in terms of almost being run over by an animal and waking up again tomorrow and doing the same thing again and again and again. And that's why, to me, I salute all the rangers because it's a job that requires a lot of strength and bravery. And that's how I found myself in it and came to love it. Because at the end of the day, so many species are endangered, so many species on the verge of extinction, and someone has to go out and do the job. And I was happy to be one of those people that were going out there and doing the job. As much as it doesn't handle respect, there's that inner feeling of strength and satisfaction that you're doing it for the well-being of a species that might not be able to even look you back in the eyes and say thank you. And that has always been the encouragement.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, I think that's something we've heard a lot is that a lot of rangers in quite a few different places around the world just don't have a lot of respect or don't get that support that they need. And like you said, I mean, you're out there protecting the biodiversity of the world and these amazing spaces. And that's definitely something we want to hopefully change in the future as we move forward. I'm curious too, you said you're out there, you're patrolling, you don't have a weapon, or you just have a stick maybe, or even that?
Yeah, no, we had the only thing we had to carry was a stick and a dagger. But now, what is a stick in an elephant? And honestly, like, what does a dagger has to do when an elephant is attacking you, or when you're just immediately confronted with a buffalo rather? It just serves as the last resort, just to scare away the smaller animals. It's like, imagine hitting the elephant with a stick is like a joke, So it was just meant to carry just in case you find yourself in a very difficult position. The only thing we carried was a dagger in case now the animal is, finishing you. At least you can be able to stab it for the last minute, trying to save. That was the only thing we used to carry. But I loved it. I think if you look at statistics, majority of the people, especially rangers that are killed by wild animals, are people who carry weapons because of the over-reliance of it. So I'm happy that it mentally trained you that immediately you go in the bush, your sense of smell, sense of sight, sense of hearing, all your senses have to be upped. It makes you very sensitive. You have to know where you're walking. You have to leave everything that is bothering your mind aside and face the bush, knowing that it's a matter of life and death. And so I got used to it that I would even go on patrols alone. I don't need to have a partner. I will, and with experience, you end up becoming like an animal. I don't know, you become cold because you smell like one. You live with them every day. You live in the bush. You learn their voices and their sounds, and you understand their way of moving. And they threaten you so much to the point that now you're not scared of any. Like, I would chase lions with hands like this, go away, because you just get used to it. So, it's just like in a profession, you just do it and get used to it and life goes on.
Yeah, that's impressive. I mean, I imagine in some ways, did it become kind of addictive almost, that sense of, I mean, when your senses are heightened and you're kind of almost more alive than you normally are in everyday life, probably just walking around your village or your town, I don't know if it kind of became this thing that you craved.
I mean, I think with my experience, and maybe you also have had that experience, I mean, living with in the bush is just sweet in its essence, it's that I didn't have so much things on my mind or things to do or responsibilities like family and what have you. I had so much peace when I was in the bush. I mean, the only thing I knew was waking up in the morning and going out to the bush and coming again in the evening and doing it in the morning. So going out in the towns, in the villages, I was feeling like, no, I'm not in my right place. My right place is in the bush. And I think actually what I realized personally, what it made me was it made me so cold and very sensitive in the outside world, simply because I was exposed to so much danger every single day that even going out, I didn't see like anything to threaten me, like if I can fight elephants every day, if I can fight buffaloes, that there was some level of animal. I mean, being like an animal, if your heart grows to be cold, in essence, that someone cannot just come in the dark and tell you like how starving. It's like, what can you do? It's like I'm being threatened by lions every single day, and I survive. So there was some kind of code that I felt socially would not be so good for when you're going out to live, because if you are used to waking up and seeing animals and dealing with animals every 25 days straight in a month and going 5 days home, was like you're becoming more an animal than a person. So I felt that, and I felt that with a lot of others as well, because we would take our share, and you realize how the bush affected them in such a way, because these are dangers present to you every single day, and you get used to them until now going out to the wild is like, I'm better off in the bush. Yeah.
Hmm. That's interesting. So, did you struggle at all at different times with family or friends and just being in society when you were so immersed in being a ranger because of that?
Somehow, I would say yes. I wouldn't. I felt so much at peace in the bush. I mean, that my relations and everything else was not as it would or it was before being a ranger, because as you know, it is hard to deal with humans in any case, and dealing with people it's difficult. But finding the peace in the bush and living for 25 days straight in the bush and going home and struggling with all of that humanity has to that comes with being humans, I would find it so hard. So socially it affected me, I have to say, to be honest. I would feel like I would even stay for 3 months in the bush without going home, because I felt like that is where I am home, with the rhinos, with the animals in the bush. That is where I was home. And it's of course, it's also on the flip side, it has its own emotional aspects as well, because if you're so much exposed to so much risk every day and getting used to all of this, then I mean something in your mind happens that you've triggered elsewhere. It becomes so. I would feel this at times, but then I've always tried to find myself back in so many aspects. I have that mental aspect of like, no, this is not going right. You need to go on the other side.
Hmm. Yeah, I wonder if, like, moving forward with rangers, if that's something. Do you see that as some kind of support that they could potentially need? Being able to kind of switch between these two worlds. I feel like you're an extremely friendly and like gregarious guy, so
Yeah.
it's hard to imagine you being like socially cold or having that experience. But I imagine maybe some other people it's even tougher for, where they really can't make that transition. I don't know if you see that as a need for rangers to have some kind of support to make that transition back and forth between the bush life and the home life.
Yeah, I think it varies from place to place, and I think with different working environments for different rangers. I mean, I know in some countries sometimes maybe rangers work going home to their families, which is so much more different than
Hmm.
in our case here. I mean, and even in Kenya as well, there's different working environments. So where I used to work, and that time I used to work, you entirely spend time in the bush. You couldn't see your family until like you're like, unless you're from very close, like within the facility where you would have a chance. But then rhinos require 24/7 protection, so you definitely wouldn't leave like going home at night every night and that. So I think bearing in mind rangers work in different environments, I think for those who entirely work maybe in a conservation area without going to their families and like once in a while, I think it would be kind of some support that would definitely be needed, because apart from that, the ideal of what the society thinks about rangers socially and how their job is sometimes looked down upon, and realizing how important it is the job that rangers do to protect ecosystems and the ecosystem services people benefit because of the work that rangers and other people protecting the environment do. They definitely need support. They need the appreciation. They need the love. They need to know that they need people to look in their faces and tell them, thank you for doing what you do for our animals and for our environment. So it can be emotionally draining. maybe I ended up thinking a lot. To me, it wasn't just a job, it was more than just a job. But maybe if someone takes it a job, is like goes home, not so much passion about that, it can be okay. But for people who are fully invested in what they do, like I normally want to be, every time I do something, I want to be invested in it. They might need that kind of moral support and that gratitude. And then sometimes even if people talk and tell you, okay, thank you, you're doing well, even if nothing else, that really matters. So I think that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we release this film, that's definitely a part of what we want to be able to find some way to do is connect people to rangers in a way that they can, even like you said, just being able to say thank you for what you do, I think can mean a lot for someone that's, in the bush for 30 days and maybe hasn't talked to anyone. And, sometimes times are tough and you wonder if what you're doing is worth it. I'm sure if it's a tough situation. I'm curious, maybe you can kind of describe a little bit for people that haven't been to that part of Kenya, what the landscapes are like, what this rhino populations are like maybe, and even kind of what the threat is to rhinos right now, because I'm very familiar with the South African situation right now, but I don't know if you could give a little bit of just kind of a setting of what it's like.
I think definitely where I used to work, Ol Pejeta, as I earlier alluded, is one of the great, great biggest black rhino sanctuary in Eastern Central Africa, with around 150 black rhinos now, actually far above their carrying capacity, which is 120 black rhinos. I think in Kenya in total we have around between 7 to 800 black rhinos. And the greatest motivation for rangers and conservation organizations is to grow this number to 2,000 in the next few years and increase their habitats, because it's been shrinking over time, as you all know. It's one factor that has made the rhino populations to decline significantly. Maybe Ol Pejeta, where I used to work, is just along the equator. If you think about the equator, it's just the equator passes across Ol Pejeta Conservancy, providing now, then being on the backdrop of Mount Kenya, providing a very good environment for a number of species to thrive. Ol Pejeta has nearly 100 species of wildlife that call it home, and close to 300 species of birds that call it home as well. And it's a combination of both. There's a river that passes across, and savanna, and more. It's more savanna, I would have to say, and still practices, because for the longest time it was a cattle ranch. And I think it's one of the conservancy that has been a role model that conservation and livestock keeping can still coexist through a model that is called livestock wildlife integration, which has now been copied to so many countries and so many properties all across Africa, because most of the times we pop in alienating all of this. But then I think if we can find a way of how we can work ourselves and maintain our traditional ways of life, and especially in the nomadic pastoralism in Kenya, as you know, where we have around maybe 200, 300,000 people who are nomadic pastoralists, we can prove that people can cohabit and live well, which is now becoming very popular in Kenya through now people bringing land together, continuing their grazing patterns, and allowing livestock to free roam within their environment. I think Kenya now is leading, I think, with over 100 community conservancies being formed so far the last few years. So its main aim is to, of course, provide a safe environment for endangered species like the chimpanzees and the rhinos, but at the same time giving hope to the entire ecosystem through now community engagements and bringing people together in terms of reasoning about why places like Ol Pejeta and so many other places need to exist for the sake of humans and for the sake of the wildlife that lives in these places.
Yeah, that sounds like a really amazing and comprehensive program that's going on there. I mean, are people actually grazing cattle in the same spaces that lions are living and things like that? I mean, how's that working?
Yes, that's becoming a trend. Like in Ol Pejeta, there's over 6,000 herd of cattle. For the longest time, Ol Pejeta has been a cattle ranch and still persists to be one, but still holds the largest population of black rhinos in Eastern Central Africa, and over 70 lands that are fully roaming within the ecosystem, being a proof that this is possible. So ideally, people graze in the same area where the lions and the leopards are, simply because it's just about understanding. It's just about science. It's about what works. It's just about having the right people to go out there and herd the cows and protect it from the lions, and all of us live together. And I think with a shrinking habitat, and when we think about reclaiming more land for conservation and protection of species that are endangered, this is a model that needs to work. So that maybe in places where we have farmers that have large tracts of land and they have cattle, they can say, we will chase away the wild animals and have our cattle. They still can. That's why you find, especially in the Masai Mara ecosystems, people are bringing land together because it's more nomadic pasture. The conflict is very minimal compared to the farmer community where they grow crops. So it's just about education. It's just about the science of how to relate and deal with these animals. And then we have more land for these species to thrive, because as you might know, the greatest question we might be asking ourselves in the future is, where do we put the animals? For instance, especially if we succeed protecting them from poaching and all of that, the biggest question is, where are we taking them next? So the more we can have these innovative models, the more we can have much more space to put these particular animals.
Yeah, it's really impressive. I mean, like you said, people aren't going anywhere either, and some of these populations are growing and cities are growing, but it's like, how can we, combine these two things so both can live in harmony, which is, it's pretty impressive. Yeah, I definitely need to get out there one of these days and experience it firsthand for sure.
Mhm.
What about the poaching side of things and how that's affected rhinos in the past? I mean, it sounds like your numbers are going up, but I wonder if you can give a little bit of history of how those populations were decimated in the past, and maybe even kind of leading into the Northern White Rhinos, some of their history and how it came that there were only 3 left and you guys were taking care of them.
Well, that's a good question. I've always loved answering that question because I know that kind of my area of specialty, I guess I can say, especially in Kenya. Well, generally in Africa, there was a massive wave of poaching that happened in the early 60s to the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. There was a massive wave of poaching, both of elephants and rhinos, for the elephant for their tusks and rhinos for their horns. In Kenya, for instance, we lost from 20,000 black rhinos in 1970 to only 400 black rhinos in 1990. All this partly because of poaching and of course habitat loss, because after independence people are taking up land and dividing it amongst themselves and pushing away much of wildlife and all of that. And not only in Kenya, I mean, this massive wave of poaching now was happening all across Africa, even in the native homelands, for instance, where the Northern White Rhinos used to live, which was northwestern parts of Uganda, South Sudan, and DRC Congo. Was the wave of poaching affected them so much. Luckily, some countries were able to come into a reasoning that we were losing so much of these iconic species. For instance, in Kenya, in the 80s, that is when there was the formation of, for instance, the Kenya Wildlife Service, which was now mandated to protect the remaining wildlife. And all the wildlife now is under the Kenya Wildlife Service as the management, with their management role of these. And in the 80s and early 90s and late 80s, there was so much massive awareness that was going on, where people are now being educated about the importance of conserving this, what was going on, and actually even people were asking themselves, like, what really is happening? We used to see hundreds of rhinos roaming across, but now we can't even see any. And that is when now through the formation of bodies like KWS, Kenya was even more willing to welcome even experts from around the world to come and help protect the remaining rhinos. That is when now there was the beginning of formation of private conservancies like Ol Pejeta and other conservancies around Kenya, that people are bringing land together and protecting the remaining rhino populations, that at least they could have a chance to repopulate again. So sadly for rhinos like the Northern White Rhinos, their fate was not that good, because even the ideal of conservation alone in countries like South Sudan and DRC Congo was politicized, because even as we speak today, we know these countries have political tensions that have always been a factor to why the rhinos declined, because when rebel groups went hiding in the bushes, they took advantage when they realized they could kill rhinos and sell their horns and make money and continue funding their wars, which was easy facilitating when they lived in the bush. So there was no governmental or any motivation to protect the populations of in these countries, and that's why the Northern White Rhinos suffered significantly. And the zoo came in, especially the Czech Republic zoo, came in to take a few rhinos in Sudan and DRC Congo, take them to the zoo, see whether essentially they would be able to reproduce them, and quote unquote, when conditions are better, we can always take the rhinos back again. Unfortunately, that didn't succeed so well.
So they just weren't able to get them to mate in captivity? Was that the problem?
I mean, they mated, but the birds were very minimal in comparison to the expectations they had. I mean, as you know, the zoo was not their home, so the number of birds they had there was not sustainable to either say they would ever get to a point of repopulating them back again in the wild. And that's why a decision was reached in 2009 to bring 4 rhinos from Czech Republic to Ol Pejeta Conservancy, because of course there was systems already, there was progress in terms of protection, security, and so forth, and see whether maybe the essence of being in the African soil would stimulate their sexual activities and have them like mate. And that's why the Northern White Rhinos came, and fortunately, even ever since they came, they've not been able to breed.
What year was that? Do you know when they moved them back?
It was 2009 December.
2009. Okay. And were these rhinos? Were the rhinos that were brought to Ol Pejeta? Were they born in the zoo, or were they some of the rhinos that were actually taken from Africa and then came back? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, the 3 of them that came, which are Sunni, Najin, and Fatu, were born in the zoo. But Sudan, who I think was a very famous rhino around the world, was born in southern Sudan. That's how he got his name to be Sudan. So they had been moved here as what they termed as the last chance of survival to see them, whether, being in Kenya, for instance, which was part of the ecosystem, was to ensure that it would stimulate their sexual activities and have them like mate. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, it has not happened.
So at that time, as far as anyone knew, the Northern White Rhino was basically poached out of existence in Africa, other than those rhinos in the zoo in Sudan. There weren't any left anywhere else, or not accessible at least? What was their range originally, and kind of what were they taken down to? I mean, I guess, do you know how many Northern White Rhinos existed before this poaching crisis happened?
Oh yeah, I mean, they were in their thousands, just like their counterparts, the black rhinos and the southern white rhinos as well. The native homelands were northwestern part of Uganda, and if you look at this region, even for now, there's always still tensions, political tensions in these areas. If you look around the northwestern parts of Uganda, the DRC Congo, the northwestern parts of South Sudan, they would extend all the way to Mali, I think, and Chad and Cameroon as well. So this entire ecosystem was where they normally used to thrive and survive. It was all like they were endemic. And suddenly now, as you know, DRC Congo still has got political conflicts. Northwestern parts of Uganda still has got political tensions. South Sudan still has. So their homes has not been a safe place for them to stay. And I think by 1980, I mean, it was alarming how much we were losing in terms of rhino populations, and as well as the northern white rhinos. And I think that's why the zoo decided to come in to salvage the northern white rhinos by just taking a few of them and taking them to Europe and their journey back to Africa, as I mentioned earlier on. So I think, to sum it up, it's the northern white rhinos. It's been a journey of betrayal. It's been a journey of political instability. It's been a journey of greed, being killed for their horns, and all other beliefs and traditions that people have about using rhino horns. So it's been a tragic and sad story to now, as we speak, having 2 last living individuals on the planet, Ajin and Fatu, who still live in Ol Pejeta Conservancy.
Yeah, so when did you get more involved with the Northern White Rhino and become a caretaker for Sudan? Can you tell a little bit of that story and how that unfolded?
I think spending my time in the bush as a ranger, we had what we normally reshuffles at work. So you would just be moved from one point to the other, from one station to the other. And I think time had come for me to be reshuffled, and they thought of where I needed to go next, I think they decided to take me to the Northern White Rhino enclosure, where I would just act as a caretaker. And that is when the very first time I had this magical experience of being very close to these animals. It was a big contrast having lived in the bush. I had to run away from them to these two semi-tamed rhinos that I had to go and feed every day and interact with and give them a decent living. And yeah, I mean, all along then it's been a big emotional roller coaster, witnessing all what's going on around their world. And fast forward, realizing the weight of what they stood for and what represented in terms of species extinction, it made me work even harder to bring to attention what was going on in their world, in their lives. And that is the kind of activism that I have been trying to push all across, because I mean, both you and me and so many other people can define what extinction is from the books and from relating it with the species that went to extinction. But there's no other species that has defined extinction more than Northern White Rhinos. It just sounds more realistic now, and it's happening right on our time, and we are watching it happen. So it's kind of the motivation that I got immediately I came working with them, and it's what I try to share out with the world every now and then.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've done a lot of great work in that realm as well. Can you talk a little bit more about what that experience was like with Sudan? When did you guys realize that there wasn't really much hope of them reproducing? And what was it like as you kind of had all of these different groups coming from around the world, shooting movies, shooting photos? I mean, that had to be quite the experience for someone that was, so close to this rhino that was kind of the last male and last hope of reproducing, and then the whole world was kind of watching at that moment. So I don't know if you can recall some of those final months or years.
I mean, when I came to work with the Northern White Rhinos, there was only 7 of them left by 10. I think there was 4 females and 3 males that were living 10. Tragically, their numbers have fallen within that career span that I've spent around the Northern White Rhinos. And when the 2 males that came from the zoo, which was Sudan and Sunni, I had the privilege of taking care of them both before they passed. And I remember that morning in 2014 when I met Sunni, who was that last male Northern White Rhino, dead, and reporting. I kind of knew now there was a twist to their well-being altogether, because Sunni was the more energetic one. He had more hope that he would mate with the females and bring forth an offspring. And now finding him dead that particular morning was a whole different twist in the story, because the other male Angalif, who was in the San Diego Zoo, and there was no chance of him ever mating. And he later died, I think, in 2015, now leaving Sudan to be the last of his kind. And, I refused to, when I was working there, I refused to be a caretaker who just would give the rhinos carrots, bananas, and tuck them to bed and open for them in the morning. I think I felt deep within me that this was a very historical moment where a species was literally going to extinction, and I was given a role to oversight that and give them a decent living before it happened. And my days of caretaking were filled with waves of joy, knowing that I'm trying my best to give them a decent life, but also a lot of sadness, because as a young man, I couldn't comprehend and wrap my head around that I was literally living or journeying extinction with these animals. It was sad to imagine that. It was painful to watch him every day live his life with this emptiness, and in the future that was so bleak, which was not promising either. So my career as a caretaker and looking after Sudan, I think has been, can just say it's been an emotional roller coaster. And it's something now that I've been trying to revelate, to bring to understanding the red light warning the Northern White Rhinos represent is extinction, and bring the awakening that if a 3-tonned animal like Sudan can be declared the last of its kind in these times, what about the less charismatic species that don't have the same charisma as the Northern White Rhinos or as the rhinos? And kind of awaken the people's understanding that there's so much that is going on the planet at this point in time, and it is just us to take care of it. And so this kind of has been my journey through my caretaking.
Yeah, I can only imagine what that experience is like. Can you talk a little bit more, just briefly, what do you know what some of the differences are between the northern white rhinos and the southern white rhinos? Because it's not just that they're from the north. They're actually different species, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So the difference is, as their name suggests, some are from the northern parts of Africa and the others are from the southern parts of Africa. But maybe before I answer that, you had already asked about the film crews and the visitors from all
Hmm.
over the world that would come to see Sudan. I think that is one of the things that I really struggled with in my time as a rhino caretaker. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I decided that I want to travel company one day to enlighten people, because I was so sad to always imagine. I was so tired every day to see people who came to see Sudan for the gram. Like it was a privilege to come and see the last living rhino and taking selfie with it and smiling and saying I'm here with the last northern white rhinos as if it was something to be proud of. And this is something that I really struggled with, that I made a mission that I want to change the way people came and saw these rhinos. It was not just for fun that they are the last of their kind. Is like the message is not going home. This is not the way it should be. We shouldn't be having the last of an animal on the entire planet. And it is now that I was devising ideas and ways of which I could communicate effectively on behalf of Sudan and the Northern White Rhinos as to why they came here and as to why everyone needs to realize that the extinction has a lot more to do with us than it has to do with them.
Mm.
And it narrows down to what we are doing about the environment. It narrows down to our political affiliations. It narrows down to how every morning and every day we are going out and trying to improve the present conditions of our environment and our planet. Because the northern white rhinos are just a symptom. There's a real tragic problem that is happening on the environment that we need to wake up to and do something about. And so the northern and the southern, of course, as their name suggests, the major differences are the ears. You'll find the northern white rhinos have got fluffy tufted ears. I think it's because of living in the dense bushes of the DRC, Congo, and South Sudan. But the southern white rhinos have less hairs on their ears. And if you look at their size, the southern looks like they're more wide, while the northern white rhinos are more like streamlined. And their skin looks a little bit rougher for the northern white rhinos, especially on the flanks, in the belly, for the northern compared to that of the southern white rhinos. So those are physically the slight differences. As you might know, the northern and the southern are just a subspecies of each other. So they're very closely related.
So you mentioned all these people coming to take photos and kind of what that experience was like. What was maybe different about David and the Kafaru crew that's, led you to kind of open up to them more and tell that story? Because it's, I feel like they did a great job of showing kind of both sides of the loss of Sudan, but also showing what you and I think your colleague Jojo, what that experience was for you personally. So kind of just curious as, a filmmaker myself, what that relationship was like and how they were able to kind of gain that trust.
I mean, just to clarify that, so many photographers and filmmakers were also coming to bring attention to the issue, which I feel like is something that has been so passionate about and something that was very needed for the Northern White Rhinos. And so I think for the case of David, who I met, and I think for the first time we met with David on a corner, I remember he was coming on a different assignment, and we met there, and we discussed about so many things and a lot of stories that had been made about Sudan, and even majority of the media were coming for the FT titles, like the last male rhino on the planet and so forth, and creating the story aspect of it. But no one had really keen in and brought the personality of Sudan and what it represented and what these animals mean to the people that take care of them and the countries where they live. And so David was committed to change the narrative of the way the documentary is and the way this documentary would be done. Because as you realize, most of the documentaries come and they take the wildlife and take away the human aspect. And there's, of course, a different voice in it. And David was like, you are the person, the people that know these rhinos so well. So you are the people who are going to tell your story. We're going to tell the world what it takes to protect this animal that you love so much. And that is when we decided to start the filming of Sudan, of Kifaru, the film, just to give legacy to Sudan, because it was not just any other rhino, it was a very special rhino that should act as a reminder to even the future generations that extinction is not just in the books, it's a reality that is happening and that happens. And species are not just numbers, that we have to talk about their extinction as if they don't matter. So we wanted to give Sudan a legacy that would hold on forever, a legacy that would be a constant reminder to anyone that is looking for inspiration, or rather the motivation to protect the environment, they would look up to and do something about it. So it was different because he spent a lot of time with us. It was candid. We didn't even know sometimes we were being filmed or this was happening, and we were just living our normal lives on an everyday basis. And he was busy documenting those moments, relationships we had, and bring out that human animal aspect, which always has been, for the longest time, not in the documentary world, that these animals, to the areas that they come, they mean a lot to the people, they mean a lot to the locals. You would see it was we depend for our families, to feed our families, to take our kids to school. So this wildlife is not just numbers, it means our whole livelihood, the people that live with them, and they deserve to be protected in that essence. So this was the whole essence of doing Kifaru the film, and I hope one day it will be out there for the world to watch it and see what's going on.
Yeah, I definitely recommend if people can get a hold of it to watch it, because I think it really does a great job of showing that connection. And you can definitely see it in the film, but I'm wondering if you're able to kind of describe some of those maybe final hours, what it was like to lose Sudan when he wasn't going to be around anymore. I mean, it seemed like you were quite connected with him. You spent so many days with him and taking care of him. It wasn't just an animal for you.
Yeah, I mean, the final moments of Sudan were tragic. I mean, we had seen them coming. Of course, we didn't expect him to live forever. But it was a life-changing moment when our species was battling with extinction. I mean, that's how I can define it. I mean, me, when I think about extinction, it's like this empty, infinite hole that a species jumps into without the hope of ever coming back again. And I could feel it on his behalf. I could feel the pain that he was feeling. I could feel the emptiness that he was. It was a moment that really hit, because it wasn't just any other rhino. It was the actual phase of what extinction looks like. And it was hard to let go of that moment. It was hard to let him go, because I felt like we needed him to live longer, to awaken the people to the reality of what is happening to our planet. Because sometimes we don't comprehend and wrap our hands around, or even see, when we talk about conserving species, when we think about conserving our environment, when we talk about climate and all of these things, not so many people are able to comprehend what's going on. But he believed, for everyone that came to see him and had an open mind, they would never live the same again, because he was such endearing, but also a tragic reminder of how extreme we humans can go in terms of being cruel to our environment, in terms of being greedy and taking away an entire population of rhinos like him. So it was a moment that was sad, but it was a moment also to let him go, because he'd really worked hard. He had a long journey in life, and he was also old. He was advanced in age. So it was the best time to let him go. Yeah.
How old was he?
It was 45 years.
45. Wow, that is old. Is that pretty close to the top end of what a northern white rhino could live to?
Yeah, I mean, that's typically above the average. The average lifespan of a rhino is between 40 to 50 years. So 45 was a big blessing, was a bonus. He was living actually on a bonus.
Yeah.
In the wild, they can live up to around 40 years on average.
Yeah, and in the film, I mean, you really can see it's such a tough moment to watch. I mean, he's got these amazing eyes too, and you can kind of see this personality, and pairing that with the loss of a species it's really significant. And I mean, there are some efforts, which who knows what will come of them, but can you talk a little bit about what's their name? Is it BioRescue, that's trying to see if they can create embryos of northern white rhinos and try to get them to reproduce?
Yeah, I mean, there's a biorescue project that is going on that is meant to give the Northern White Rhinos a chance to continue surviving using artificial reproductive techniques, which eventually adopted to use in vitro fertilization as the remedy. Because luckily they had collected some semen from the males before they died, and they have, for a few times, maybe 6, 7 times, collected eggs or oocytes from the two females and flown them to Italy to create embryos, where I think they have now 12 viable embryos that were ready to be implanted into southern white rhinos that are going to carry the pregnancy as surrogate mothers. Very cutting edge technology and science to try and revert the extinction of the northern white rhinos. And I mean, toes and fingers crossed, this is going to be the remedy and the hope for the survival of this species. So much advancement has been made on that. We've already identified surrogate moms that are going to play the role of surrogacy. They have identified a male that has been sterilized to act as a tisa bull, so that when the females get on heat, they can try to do the embryo transfer. And so far, everything is looking aligned. So we're just hoping for the best, that maybe in the future we will have a baby northern white rhino.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. So, yeah, fingers crossed that that project comes through. And it's amazing the technology and science that goes into something like that. But at the same time, we need to not rely on that as a way to save these species, as they come to an end. Hopefully, we can do a better job with many of these other ones that are threatened out there. Can you talk more about how this kind of stimulated you to then go out and become kind of an advocate for saving these species and for wildlife and for the work you do? I know I saw something where you went to Hong Kong. I don't know when this was, but I wouldn't. I'd love to talk about that experience too, but kind of more about just what you're doing now to bring more awareness.
I think my moments with Sudan were always filled with a lot of conversations. I literally would talk to him like I'm talking to you. And I made a promise to him one day when I was feeding him, and I saw him dropping tears. And I promised him that I didn't know what he felt, but I felt at that moment that there was a lot of profound emptiness that was inside him that he could not even express himself for. And I made a promise to be his voice, and realized I had an opportunity to be an activist about species extinction and what's going on around his world. And I've had all these other chances now to go around the world in different countries. And I think some of the initial countries I've been was Hong Kong. And we all know the role Hong Kong plays in regard to trafficking of animal byproducts to the mainland, the Far East, rather, without naming names of countries here. The role Hong Kong plays. And actually, of all the countries I've been in, all the talks I've been in, being in Hong Kong was the highlight, because you could really see the divide between the older generation of people about their reasoning and their affection towards protecting species, to the younger generation that were willing to know what was going on and how they could effectively protect species to going extinction. So I've done a series of talks and visited a lot of schools. I visited a lot of schools when I was in Hong Kong. We did talks in those schools, and it was amazing to see the young generation of people owning up the story and taking up responsibility to go out there and protect their environment.
Yeah, I mean, that gives you a lot of hope that the younger generations are gonna to do things differently. And yeah, I remember, I think there was like a little clip of you and some other folks coming up to a place that was selling ivory, and I think there's some law where if the ivory was, you know, from before a certain period of time, that you could sell it, but if it was after, it was illegal. But there's not really any way to tell, and it's really interesting, the laws and stuff there. But it's good to hear that the younger generation is seeing things differently and open for a change.
Yeah, I mean, we were walking past the shops. I mean, I can say it was like irony for me to walk into a shop that had artifacts made of rhino horn and elephant tusks. And we were going to this shopkeeper to remind him that they're watching the last remaining northern white rhino, and it is sad to sell byproducts. And was like, I don't care, I mean, if you can't take care of your animals down there in Africa, how are you blaming me for this? And there was so much disconnect from the younger generation of people that were like, freezing up and saying, James, my grandma has rhino horn in their house, and I'm going to tell her to submit it to the authorities because it's wrong to have it. So there was a massive difference between the ideologies and understanding and even the compassion for protection of wildlife to in the younger generation that it is with the older generation.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Could you kind of talk a bit about what you're up to now and where you're heading? You've had so many amazing experiences up to this point as a ranger and caretaker of Sudan and all the great things that you've done over the years. But what's kind of the future look like for you?
So, last year I decided to make that move and I left my caretaking job and opened my travel company, Jemu Expeditions. I am motivated by the desire to travelers that are not just in there to tick boxes and tick wildlife away in terms of the sightings, but people that are willing to engage in conversations about what's going on in our planet and our environment, beautiful, diverse flora and fauna that we have in East Africa and how we can effectively protect it. And that is kind of what I've been investing my time in, which is something I feel like is so much missing because tourism is the greatest foreign exchange earner in Kenya, which means a lot of tourism come through Kenya. And I feel like there is a missing part in terms of information where especially travel companies sell destinations and wildlife like, hey, come see the big five, come and go see that. And then the people are rushed to go and take off these animals and go home other than let's go and learn about what's going in the world of these animals and realize where we can play our part and do something about it. So currently working on that. Its business is coming up so well. I'm also writing a book, doing a book project where I'm kind of trying to relay the story of my story as a rhino caretaker and how I came to be there and bring some inspiration home to people to continue caring about their environment. And that's why I'm doing my travels as well. I am still doing my conservation speaking, so I'm moving from one point to the other, doing the talks and leveraging on this story to bring more inspiration to people.
Yeah, definitely sounds like you're keeping busy. Can you maybe give an example of one of the expeditions that you would do with your company, Jemu Expeditions? Because yeah, I love the idea of, especially coming from someone that has so much experience as a ranger. Like for me, that's the type of experience I would want to go on. You know, I don't want to be just carted around in a car and like, here's this animal, here's this animal. All right, go have your wine and take off. But you have all this experience and knowledge that you can bring to it and connections. So maybe, I don't know if there's this, one or two that you would want to highlight what that experience would be like.
Yeah, just to emphasize more on that, what I am also looking into is having that slow travel where we just not rushed again, not to tick off boxes of animals or rushed to go from this destination to the other and see that much. So my travels are more chill. I like planning them with people all together. And some of the signature ones I have, especially around Ol Pejeta, because I know the place so well. I've worked there for almost 10 years. When people come on safari with me on Ol Pejeta, I make sure they do get this immersive experience. Apart from sitting down in the vehicle, we book them for extra activities where they can walk with the rangers, go like for a bushwalk, understand how it takes to protect these animals on an everyday basis. We get them to meet the last two female Northern White Rhinos. We get them to go and meet the anti-poaching unit and the anti-poaching dogs and see the role these dogs are playing in terms of helping protection of conservation. And we go out there in the bush and go drive around, see what nature has for us, because it is my company's belief that every animal is beautiful and every animal has significant importance in the ecosystem. We always don't have checklists for our guests. We just tell them we are driving out to enjoy nature, whether it gives to us a bird or a mongoose or an elephant or the big five, whatever that we come across, it's what is ideally the essence of travel. And I try to make it more connecting and more immersive so that then people can go back home inspired and not just having taken away from the animals and having taken selfies with the animals, but are also inspired to go back in their native countries and protect species that are also endangered. Because we also remember that we have more charismatic species here. We have more beautiful animals like the elephants and the lions and all these other animals. But I believe the information part is very important in the travel industry, where now we relay the information, and we can inspire our travelers that when they go back home, they can look into their environment, the species that are in danger, the species that needs help, and hoping that people come on safari for vacation years, but at the same time, they go home with an inspiration to look at the environment from a different angle.
Yeah, that's really great, and definitely hope I can maybe come do a Jemu expedition one of these days in the future. It sounds pretty amazing to me. I think what was interesting too, I spent quite a bit of time in South Africa, and yeah, when you're first there, it's like the big five is exciting, but then it's once you start noticing the different birds and all the other wildlife and even insects and snakes. I mean, there's just so many different things to learn about that bring out the richness of the environment and how they interact, and especially to have someone with that knowledge to be able to relay that. I think it just tells a richer story that then someone could go back and be more connected and excited about sharing with other people. So yeah, it's really sounds like an amazing business you got in the works. So best of luck to the continued growth of that for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Do you have any advice for someone that might be considering being a ranger or just getting into conservation? I mean, you had a deep connection early on, but maybe someone else that has that passion but isn't sure how they're going to be able to use it. I don't know if you have any advice for someone.
Yes, I think I have some advice for someone willing to go into conservation, become a ranger. I will simply tell them that this is not just their career. Conservation is not a role or a responsibility of a few people, that they have to shoulder it and carry it alone. Conservation, to me, and my experience and my understanding, and what I'm going around telling the world, is those that go into conservation have been called to call others to come and join and create a army of a people that want to protect the planet, which is our only home. When there's so many looming crises around our planet, climate change, species extinction, and now even the soil crisis that we're facing. I mean, in the next 60, 70 years, the soil might not be even able to support crop farming. I would want, or I would wish to encourage anyone going to conservation, wanting to be a ranger, to go in the career as an ambassador, to bring as many people to the understanding that our planet needs all of us, and the few of us that call ourselves conservationists cannot tackle the prevailing problems and challenges that are facing our environment. And we are called to become conservationists, to bring as many people together so that we can continue protecting our environment. And so I will tell them it's a noble cause, it's a noble job. It's also a job that doesn't earn so much, it's a job that doesn't have either so much respect as well, but it's a job that you wake up doing every day, knowing that the future generations, the species that live on this planet, will have a better chance to thrive and survive because of the efforts that we are putting today. And being counted on those efforts, even if you won't enjoy the fruits in the future, is kind of one of the most remarkable feelings that comes with being a conservationist.
Yeah, really, really well put. And hopefully someday in the near future we can change to where there is more respect for these jobs, because they are so important. And yeah, it's important for everyone to get involved somehow. I feel like that's a great place to end, but at the same time, I'm just recalling, I wanted to ask you about, I think I saw online that you recently saw the gorillas in Rwanda. I don't know if you're willing to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been my life's dream to go and see the gorillas. Actually, I was going there part of like fulfilling my dream, but also part of my expeditions. I have a lot of guests who have been requesting me to go and do the gorilla trekking, and I wanted to go do the experience myself and know what I'm going to recommend. So, oh man, it was one of the most magical feeling. We met this big family of gorillas. It's called the Musunguzi family. The silverback was so huge, and he was just relaxing, taking some siesta. We spent almost an hour with them as designated, and yeah, I don't know. There's this humbling feeling when you are in the presence of these animals. They're so powerful. They're so strong animals. But at the same time, they're so vulnerable, and they make you feel so small in their presence. And sitting there watching them swim with the family, really brought me into a very strong awakening that I always felt when I was around Sudan mostly. And it was an highlight for this year, definitely. And I would recommend people to just go. It does not only support tourism and the local people and the communities, but it also a life-changing experience. So I would encourage so many people to go and visit. Yeah, and if they want details, they can holler me.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it sounds like an amazing experience, and I could imagine you as their guide would be a great way to go about it. Maybe as a final thing, how could people follow you, connect with you more, find out how to get a Jemu expedition?
Yeah, people can follow me on socials. They're active if they follow me on social media as Jemu Mwenda on Instagram. On Facebook is James Mwenda. And also for my travel company, they can follow at Jemu Expeditions, which is Jemu Expeditions. They can even sign in for the mailing list where they can get updates on where my travels are taking me and what's going on. Yeah, I mean, if anyone has questions or anyone would want to hop on a safari with me in Kenya or in Tanzania and Rwanda, our plan, we've everything put into place. So we definitely want to assist them. And let's all continue seeking inspiration for protecting our planet, even through traveling.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'll put all those links on our website as well so people can find them. But yeah, really appreciate you coming on here, James, and kind of fighting all the technical difficulties we had to deal with and just taking the time to share more of your story, Sudan's story, and what you've got coming in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, John, for having me as well. And thank you for your patience as well. I feel I've been so sleepily to get, but I've also been traveling around Rwanda, whatever, some safaris and so forth. And thank you so much for also what you're doing in terms of doing the film, The Rhino Man. I hope it brings the message home that rangers are heroes and sung heroes and very important people. And I hope we can elevate their standards in the society for people to even see it as a career, that is really noble and should be respected. And as well, let rangers feel congratulated for the job they do on an everyday basis. So thank you also for what you're doing, because in the sphere of conservation, all of us have a part to play. I played my part as a ranger. I'm still doing that. You can do podcasts, you can educate people, you can press buttons, you can make a story. You're doing your part. Someone else can do their part. Someone else can donate. Someone else can support. Someone else can talk to the other about what's going on. And we all will find ourselves doing something for the environment. So thank you as well for what you're doing.
Yeah, appreciate it, James. And yeah, hopefully we'll meet in person one of these days, maybe on one of your expeditions. And till then, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Rhino Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe and review our podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Rhino Man the Movie. More details about Rhino Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who have dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He's the brilliant composer for Rhino Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the Rhino Man Podcast.